Good morning, dear family, dear brothers and sisters, and dear friends. Perhaps before we begin the Dharmatalk this morning, I'd like to invite some of the brothers and sisters, are there brothers? I'm not sure, to come up and to offer you a song. Yesterday, when they heard I was giving a Dharmatalk today, because it was quite unexpected, I found out yesterday too that I would give the Dharmatalk today. So to offer their support to me, they wanted to offer you a song. And I said, yes, take up some time, as much as you would like. So they are here. It's actually a wonderful song. I just received a copy, so this will be an impromptu translation as well as an impromptu Dharma talk. The song will be in Vietnamese, and I'd like to take a few moments to translate the lyrics. It's about love and how to love as if you are a child. So when we love, our heart is like a child, and we continue to give without any hesitation. And the sun brings its light everywhere, and it gathers in the leaves. Sun brings the sunlight is everywhere, and it gathers itself in the leaves. And whether the sunlight is full or not full, it's there to offer. It's there as an offering. And the leaves, they are waving as if to say hello in the mornings, good morning. And the autumn breeze, we can say spring breeze. And as the spring breeze passes by, then the leaves, are fluttering in the breeze, in the wind. And our destination is a place of peace. The place that we choose to meet is a place of peace. And when we love, suddenly the world becomes much bigger. And however much space that we already have inside, it becomes more spacious. And the love that we have for our family or for each other, for brotherhood and sisterhood, we can find on every path we take. And the place of peace is where we call home. And the clouds, they float. They are forever floating by. And please just continue to do so. So when we love, there's that sense of freedom. We can enjoy the presence of a cloud, but we can also have enough space and freedom to let the cloud go. And we join our palms in a form of a lotus to greet each other in the morning. And the first step we take outside is the step we take. We step into the space outside of space. There's a concept in Buddhism where there's an idea about space being outside of space, and in that space is where you find freedom. It's not necessarily outside of where you are. Actually, the step that you are taking right on this earth, it could be considered space outside of space. It depends on how you are able to get in touch with that step. Are you able to touch your nature of interbeing? Or are we stuck in our shell of our small self? And that could be considered space outside of space. And the last line is, you and I are not two. So that's a rough translation of the song. I hope someone can in the future can make a more poetic translation, just so you understand the meaning of the song. So now my brothers and sisters, my sisters will offer you this song.
Khi yêu thương lòng như đứa trẻ, xin cho hoài không đắn đo chi. Ngày thâu nắng vàng tươi về thăm và gom lá điểm tô một mùa. Vơi hay đầy cũng để cho thôi, lá đông đưa chào nhau buổi sáng. Gió thu qua thì bay nhẹ nhàng, nơi hẹn về là chốn an vui. Nơi hẹn về là chốn an vui. Khi yêu thương trần gian bóng rộng, không gian nhiều càng mở thêm ra. Tình thân quyến gặp trong mọi nẻo, và nơi chốn bình an là nhà. Mây bay hoài xin cứ bay đi, chắp tay hòa chào nhau buổi sáng. Bước chân ra một phương ở ngoài, nơi em và tôi vốn không hai. Nơi em và tôi vốn không hai. Khi yêu thương lòng như đứa trẻ, xin cho hoài không đắn đo chi. Ngày thâu nắng vàng tươi về thăm và gom lá điểm tô một mùa. Vơi hay đầy cũng để cho thôi, lá đông đưa chào nhau buổi sáng. Gió thu qua thì bay nhẹ nhàng, nơi hẹn về là chốn an vui. Nơi hẹn về là chốn an vui. Khi yêu thương trần gian bóng rộng, không gian nhiều càng mở thêm ra. Tình thân quyến gặp trong mọi nẻo, và nơi chốn bình an là nhà. Mây bay hoài xin cứ bay đi, chắp tay hòa chào nhau buổi sáng. Bước chân ra một phương ở ngoài, nơi em và tôi vốn không hai. Nơi em và tôi vốn không hai.
Can we offer our sisters some flowers? Thank you so much for offering your song. I guess I've changed the topic of the Dharmatalk today. We can speak about love. But maybe before that we can enjoy 3 sounds of the bell. To begin the Dharma talk today. Please sit comfortably, upright, but relaxed, and just feel the sensations of your breath coming in and out of your body, and enjoy how it feels like to simply be alive, breathing in and out. There's nowhere to go, nothing to do. We're all here together at this moment. No pressure to understand anything or to do anything, or no one is pressing us to fulfill any kind of deadlines, or no one has the right to pull us out of this hall at this moment. We have the full right to sit here and to be fully present in the here and now. So please enjoy your breathing as you listen to 3 sounds of the bell. So, dear Sangha, today is the 2nd of May, the year 2019, and we are sitting in the Assembly of Stars Meditation Hall, Lower Hamlet, Plum Village, during our spring retreat. And I hope you've enjoyed your week so far. For those of you who are leaving tomorrow, this is your last full day with us. And I hope you get a chance to fully experience your last full day here. The song that we just heard speaks a lot about love. And I think, even though you may not understand the lyrics, I think it speaks about a kind of love that many of us are looking for, or consciously or unconsciously. I think we're all attracted to love and beauty and truth. And the lyrics of this song, it kind of speaks to all three. We want to be able to love and be loved, right? We want to love as if we are a child, as a child loves. In other words, we want a kind of unconditional love, a love that is given freely, no hesitations, no calculations. We want a beautiful kind of love. And maybe many of us have been looking for this for a long time already. I remember myself looking for this kind of love for a very, very long time. And the question is, have we found it? Or rather, why can't we find it? Is it possible to find this kind of love? What is preventing us from loving in this way? Or what is preventing us from being loved in this way? In Buddhism, or particularly in the Plum Village tradition, the answer is kind of apparent in that are we available enough? Are we present enough to receive that kind of love, or even recognize that kind of love? And the second question is, why are we not present enough? So the training in Plum Village and what you have received this last week centers around how to bring the mind and body home to the present moment. How to be more present for yourself and for your environment and for others. And this is the first obstacle, I think. The capacity, or rather the lack of the ability to come home to the present moment is maybe the primary obstacle in our journey, or in our search for love, or to be loved. Why is it so difficult, though, for us to come home to ourselves, to be present for ourselves? It sounds like an easy concept, just come back to the present moment, notice everything that's happening in the present moment. But why is it so difficult sometimes for us to do that? For me, and I think in my experience, in my practice, I'm beginning to recognize more and more that it has to do with my resistance to being with my suffering. And I guess it's a habit energy that has been transmitted from thousands and thousands of years. Of course, I want to run away from suffering, just like I've always ran away from predators. Or, in our long line of history, in our ancestry, we've had the habit of running away from predators, running away from what we perceive as a potentially dangerous situation, or a situation that can bring about suffering. So sometimes, and this habit may be quite strong in each of us, so sometimes, let's say even a very small suffering inside of us comes up, a small frustration, a small anger, even boredom. Boredom is pretty much, not so dangerous, right? But we can't handle boredom either. It's a kind of suffering for us. So when it comes up, we tend to get uncomfortable, and right away we can feel ourselves. We can feel our mind churning and searching for a way out of this, even small discomfort, small anger, small frustration, a little bit of boredom. We're already looking to get out of this, of these small things. And very few of us have the capacity to just sit with it without having to run away from it, without looking for something to cover it up. Nowadays, we have so many different ways to help us run away from our suffering, whether it's a small suffering or a big suffering. We have so many forms of entertainment, and the internet, all of the devices that we have, gaming. So many forms of entertainment. Now if you go on YouTube, it seems like it's all entertainment. There are some educational channels, I think. Sometimes the monastics, we also browse a little bit, but we have a practice, we need a second body. And that's to help us not get lost and pulled away by, there's so many different tempting sites. And some of them quite toxic. But nonetheless, there are sites that are quite wholesome, and it's like good food for the soul, but you have to really search to find those sites. So the internet is not all bad, but it's a huge source and a huge form of entertainment for us. A door we can open when we want to run away from our suffering. And I realize in my practice that there are so many different ways that we can run away from our suffering. Not just through entertainment, whether it's reading a book or a magazine or turning on the computer or immersing myself in work or Oh yeah, I was speaking to some teenagers just this last Christmas. I had a chance to go to Deer Park Monastery and got to spend some time with some teenagers that I had seen grow up in the monastery. They came to the monastery when they were babies or 2, 3 years old, 5, 6 years old, and now they're teenagers. So I had some interesting conversations with them, and they revealed to me many different ways that they could get lost on the internet or on these apps, I guess, apps and movies. So I discovered something called binge watching. I don't know if any of you in here binge watch anything. Can you raise your hands? You do? Oh, okay, yeah, well, there you go. You can identify with the teens. That's also a way of running away from, a form of running away from our suffering, I found. The more I spoke to the teenagers, and I was like, wow, the young. And they were kind of representative of teens out there, the group I was speaking to. Although they had that special side, they go to the monastery every year, a few times a year with their parents. They do know how to practice mindfulness, and yet on the other end, they were also completely consumed by this, all these shows and series they have. And nowadays, when I spoke to them, I said, you know what, I'm quite grateful that I grew up in my time where when we were able to watch TV or when we watched a series that it only came on once a week. So it was only 1 hour a week that I could, watch whatever series that I was interested in. But now the internet is all of these shows, it's at your fingertips, and you can choose to watch 8 hours, 12 hours in one sitting without having to wait for another week. So I found, so I told them right away, this is the sickness of your time. So you need to find a way to get out of this yourself and to help other teens your age to not be caught in this. It's 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day, just in front of a screen. And it's something normal for the teens now. It's not abnormal for them. But on the other hand, I can also understand why. Because the environment that they're growing up in, this is America. I don't know about Europe or other parts. And maybe not all parts of America are like this, but the environment that they are in is becoming more and more unsafe. So what happens is parents don't want their children to be outside. And when I go home, I get in touch with this. My nieces and nephews, they're not allowed to go outside for fear of being kidnapped and things like that. So they're locked at home all the time. They can't go outside to enjoy nature like I used to when I was a child. I remember the safety of the environment and what it was like to run in the fields or go from neighbor to neighbor and not feel threatened. But it's not that the case. It's not like that anymore with the children now. There's a lot of fear in the environment, in the collective consciousness. And so a byproduct of that fear is that the children have to stay indoors. And their form of entertainment is not the parks or the fields or riding your bicycles around the neighborhood anymore, but their form of entertainment is an electronic device and binge watching series after series. So the youth of our days, in our time, I think that's a form of their training of running away from their suffering. In our time, we also have a sort of training of sorts, running away. We've also trained ourselves how to run away from our own suffering. It may not be the series of shows, TV. It could be books, magazines, music, other forms of entertainment, clubbing, I don't know, many other forms of entertainment. And it's due to the lack of or very low tolerance for suffering, or how to be with suffering and still feel okay and safe enough within ourselves. And some of us, when we turn to spirituality, it could also be another way of running away from your suffering, if we're not careful. Yesterday, someone asked me the question, my thinking is, I know sometimes I have wonderful thoughts, and I value the act of thinking, because sometimes it can produce many wonderful ideas, wonderful thoughts. But at other times, I feel my thinking just pulls me away from the present. And I don't want to be... So I see that sometimes it gives me a lot of happiness, but at other times it gives me a lot of suffering, my thinking. And I want to be free from my thinking. I don't want to be subject, a victim of my thinking, whether it's positive thinking or negative thinking. So how can I be free from my thinking and not be pulled away by my thinking, not be a victim of my thinking? I want to transcend my thinking. So that was the question. I wonder how many of you have the same question. Sometimes, yeah. I think it's a question a lot of people have when they come to the monastery, especially when you come here and we talk about no thinking, practicing no thinking. You might think, oh, how can I be free from my thinking? But I think, that is a kind of wrong perception about the teachings of Buddhism, in that we are teaching you to transcend your thinking, meaning teaching you how to be completely free of your thinking and not be affected by it. In other words, to throw away your thinking. That's not the teaching. That's not the teaching at all. Just like when we teach about absolute relative truth or absolute truth, in Buddhism there's the concept of relative truth and absolute truth, or the ultimate truth. And the relative truth you can understand in terms of you and me, things being outside of each other. If I go to the airport, I need a passport. For instance, if I get on an airplane, I need an airplane ticket. if I go to the grocery store, I need to pay money to buy groceries. These are kind of relative truths. We all have names: Adam, Madeline, Susan, John, etc. Conventional truth, the kind of truth that helps us that's quite necessary in our daily lives, actually, so that we can relate to one another, so that we know when a person is born, when a person dies. So you have a birthday, you have a death certificate, you have a day you graduated, etc. You have a mother, father. And they're all true in the relative sense. Yeah. And all very helpful as well, all wonderful as well. And then we have the idea of the absolute truth, or the ultimate. And the ultimate truth you can understand in terms of no birth, no death, no coming, no going. Things inter-are with one another. For instance, when we look at this flower, it's an orchid. It has the name of an orchid, but it can also have no name. So in the conventional truth, it's named orchid. I think Phalaenopsis dendrobia. I don't know. So it has a name, orchid. But in the ultimate, it could have no name. And it's okay that it has no name. You look and you see a flower. But also if you look deeply, you see that the flower is made of non-flower elements, like the sun, the rain, the earth, the clouds, the person who cultivated the flower, brought it to the store, etc. The sister who purchased the flower and the one who placed it here. So without any of those, one of those elements, you wouldn't see this flower here. So the flower here is made of non-flower elements. And so we can say the flower is empty of a separate self. So that is a kind of idea that the idea of a flower is being made of non-flower elements, or the idea of interbeing. These are all also concepts that lead us to understand the ultimate truth. And in Buddhism, there's a famous example of the ultimate truth. I'm not sure if you can give an example of the ultimate truth. But needless to say, these are words and concepts that will help you to understand. So there's the example of the wave and the water. You have the wave, and the wave goes up and down. It has a beginning and an end. But at the same time, the wave is also water. And if the wave lives its life just as a wave, it might suffer. It will say, oh, I'm going up now, but one day I will go down. And that could lead to a bit of depression. Or I'm not as high as the other wave. Or I'm not as low as the other wave. That could also bring about complexes. I'm not as beautiful as the wave to my left. I want to be further away. I want to be that wave over there. So these ideas can lead the wave, make the wave suffer a little bit. I'm not as great as this other wave. I want to be the number one wave. Yeah. This is if the wave only lives in the historical dimension, in the relative or the conventional truth. But if the wave is able to touch the water, the wave doesn't have to look for water. If it is able to touch the water, it can see that it's already water. It doesn't have to look for water. So the wave can live itself as it can live its life as a wave, but at the same time, it can also live its life as water. And water here you can think of as like the ultimate dimension. So that's one example in Buddhism to help you kind of understand a little bit about the concept of the relative truth and the absolute truth, or the ultimate truth. The problem is, for some of us, when we learn about Buddhism, when we come to these teachings, we want to throw away the relative truth. We just want to look for the absolute. Because we want to get to the point where we just see ourselves as water. I'm not affected going up or down. No, I'm free from that. I don't compare myself to other waves because I'm just water. So we seek to throw out the relative, and we just want the absolute. But that's not possible. When we look deeply into the relative, we can see the absolute already. We don't have to throw anything out. And it's a form of it's yet another form of running away from our suffering. Maybe sometimes in our daily lives, in the relative, you can say, there are certain difficulties that come up. Maybe we're not able to handle it. So it's easy to want to look for the absolute, the ultimate, a place where we think that suffering doesn't exist. And that's a wrong perception of what relative and absolute truth is. It's the same with looking for the kingdom of heaven, kingdom of God, or the Pure Land of the Buddha. It has to do with the same habit energy of running away from our suffering. Just like the person who asked me about the thinking, how can I transcend both my positive and my negative thoughts? It's also a form of running away from our suffering. When we want to get rid of our suffering, sometimes for the sake of getting rid of our suffering, we get rid of our happiness as well. So we throw both of them out. I want to transcend both my positive and negative thoughts, but actually it's for the sake of not being affected by your negative thoughts. It's for the sake of not freedom, but because maybe you cannot handle the thoughts that make you suffer. So the question is not how can I be free of both my positive and negative thinking. The question should be, how can I better handle both the positive thoughts and the negative thoughts? Because thinking is a very, very natural thing to do, part of being human. And many of us, I think the majority of us, we have the habit of, if we have not practiced mindfulness, or if we have not learned how to practice no thinking, or shifting our thinking, then the majority of us, we are being pulled by our thinking all the time. So if a positive thought comes up, a thought that makes you joyful and happy, you become joyful and happy. And you ride on the wave of this thought for however long it lasts. And if a thought makes you sad, depressed, or angry, or in despair, you also ride on the wave of this thought until it dies out. And in that way, we are victims of our thinking. But suppose a positive thought comes up and you bring up the energy of mindfulness, and you can say, this is the thought. You recognize it for what it is. This is a thought that is nourishing me right now. It's making me so happy, joyful. And with that recognition, with that mindfulness, that thought can nourish you. Much more effective and more powerful than if you just let it be, because you're able to recognize it. It's just like when we're happy and we know we're happy, that happiness is increased manyfold. But if we're happy and we just let it be, and it comes and goes on its own. When we're happy and we're aware of that we're happy, that happiness has a chance to be prolonged, and also has a chance to have a lingering impression on our mind. And then some days when we need that happiness to manifest again, it can come up more easily. There are days when we are quite down, and many sad thoughts may come up. But if there's a happy memory, a joyful memory that has left a big enough impression on us, at those moments, those memories may come to the surface and kind of rescue you from that moment of sadness or that moment of despair. So it's quite important to register, to learn how to register, to recognize our happiness as it's happening, our joy as it's happening. You strengthen when we recognize, when we register what is happening to us, we strengthen that experience much more. So in Plum Village, we have so many, if you come to us often, you probably notice that we have so many festivities and celebrations, and we find all kinds of opportunities to celebrate, even the smallest things. The first lotus that blooms in our lotus pond, for instance. There's a whole celebration around that. Sometimes we, have a picnic dinner or something. Everybody just sits around the lotus pond just to watch this one lotus bud. And maybe it's not even in bloom yet, but that's a form of recognizing our happiness, celebrating our joy and happiness. And when we're able to do that, that happiness and that joy increases many, many-fold. So learning to register, recognize, register, celebrate, and make our happiness last. So when a positive thought comes up, a joyful thought, a thought that nourishes you, a thought that maybe allows you some peace or gives you some happiness, please take note of them. Remember them. And when a thought that's not so nourishing comes up, a thought that maybe creates a little bit of anger in you, despair, or separation, a thought that makes you feel disconnected, we can also learn how to recognize, oh, this kind of thinking is making me feel disconnected from my community, for instance. This kind of thinking is making me feel disconnected from humanity. Maybe you can recognize it, call it by its true name. And then the second question you can ask is it true? If it's not true, please let it go. I often ask in terms of processing my thinking and recognizing them for what they are, and also evaluating their value. Like if a thought makes me feel disconnected from my community, I say, oh, is there any truth in this thought? And very often I see that line of thinking is not in line with interbeing or non-self, or even impermanence. It's that kind of thinking, very often it's me versus the world. I am separate from my community. And there's some untruth to that. There may be some truth, but there may be some untruth to that. And I have to recognize and acknowledge where my thinking is untruthful. Because sometimes, it's the untruth, it's not the truth, but you keep wanting to repeat it. Why? Because it makes you feel better. I don't know if you have that experience. I have that experience a lot. Sometimes it's already, not the truth. For instance, if I'm angry at someone and I already recognize the reason why I'm angry and it's not the truth, it was based on a wrong perception, but still I repeat that story in my mind because I'm still angry with that person and I want that story to be true. Even though a part of me already knows that it's not true anymore. So like, in a way, I'm continuing to lie to myself. In a way, I'm prolonging that anger. So, when we recognize the value of our thoughts, also there's a training in letting go. Yeah. I need to let go of this untruth and open my heart to embrace the truth. Because embracing the truth, sometimes when the truth comes, when a fact or a perception that is more true than another one comes, sometimes it's difficult to embrace. Because you have to let go of something. You have to let go of your anger or your wrong perception, or you have to admit that you're wrong. So that's why when the truth comes, sometimes it's more difficult to admit, and it takes some courage to embrace the truth. So good luck. So I guess my point is we don't necessarily have to transcend our thinking to be free from our thinking. It's a matter of knowing how to handle the thinking that comes up, and that's where your freedom lies. That's where your maybe transcendence lies. So it's possible not to run away from our suffering. And just like this flower, our suffering, the flower is made of non-flower elements. Our suffering is also made of non-suffering elements. In Buddhism, you maybe hear a lot about no suffering, or because in the Heart Sutra, they also speak about no. The first truth is suffering, and the second truth is the first. There are 4 noble truths in Buddhism. The first noble truth is the truth on ill-being or suffering. The second is the causes of ill-being or the causes of suffering. The third is the cessation of ill-being, and the fourth is no suffering. And the fourth is the path leading out of ill-being, the path of happiness. And many people, when they hear about the cessation of suffering, you think, oh, there's no suffering. There's, you can get to a point where there's no suffering. But I think when they say, in the Heart Sutra, for instance, when there's when you hear the line, no suffering, or that's in the older version, the new version that we have is no ill being. When you hear those words, no ill being, you might think, oh, there's a place that there's no ill being, no suffering. But actually, what it means is that ill being is made of non-ill being elements. So, no ill being means that ill being cannot exist as a separate entity. There are causes and conditions that have made up the ill being, and we have to be able to identify what this ill being is made up of. So no ill being means that ill being is made up of many, many things, many elements. And when we look deeply, we can identify the causes of our suffering, some of the causes of our difficulties. Just like when we look into the flower, we can recognize the sun, the rain, the earth, etc. When we look into our ill-being, we can also recognize the many different elements that have helped it to come into being. In Plum Village, we have a motto. Our motto is no mud, no lotus. And you cannot have the lotus without the mud. And you cannot have the happiness without the suffering. It's thanks to the mud that the lotus can grow. And our teacher often says, you can't grow lotuses on marble. Right? The lotus it needs the mud to grow. Just like our happiness, it needs our suffering. It needs the suffering to grow. And when I look around myself in our community or in our Sangha, I see that those members who have undergone the most suffering very often end up with the most insights, with the most powerful insights. And very often those members have the most capacity to help people get out of that suffering, because they know how. So don't fear your suffering. Don't have any... it's like compost for your happiness, also compost for your insight. The only thing is, don't go looking for it. You already have enough. So I'd like to write some things on the board. So when we take some time to look into our suffering, we can So when we take some time to look into our suffering, we can see that actually nothing survives without food. If your suffering is despair or anger or fear, all of those things have its sources of nutriment. In Buddhism, we understand, we say that nothing can exist without food. If you look around nature around you, you can see the truth of this. If you look at the situations around you that you're in, or the situations around you, you can also see the truth of this. When you look at war, you can also see the truth of this, that nothing can survive without food. So we have to learn how to identify the sources of food, the kinds of food that is feeding the suffering. And I'd like to share with you 4 different categories today that you can look into for sources of nutriments that can feed your suffering or feed your happiness. Happiness also needs food to survive. It's not just suffering that needs food to survive. Happiness also needs food to survive. If you are in a relationship and you don't nourish your happiness every single day, you don't nourish your love, love also needs food to survive. Imagine one day when you just ignore each other. You don't say hello, you don't say goodbye, you don't, provide any kind of affection to one another. You don't express your love to one another. You can continue being like that for about a week and you'll see your relationship, it will, you can file papers. My sister told me there's a book that had 7 lines to divorce, or 9 lines to divorce. You can say something, and then the next line. By the 7th line, you want a divorce already. So the words that we feed each other can also make or break our relationship. Anything needs food to survive. Our love, our happiness, our joy, our suffering as well. So in the Buddha's teachings, he shared about 4 different sources of nutriments, and nowadays we can maybe identify more as well. So they call this the 4 nutriments. the first source is edible foods. So maybe this has to do with what we eat, but also how we eat as well. So you can, maybe if there's pain in your body, if there's some illness in your body, you can look at edible foods as being one of the sources that is producing the illness as well. The kinds of food we eat sometimes could be quite toxic, but also how we eat can also be quite toxic. In some parts of the world, many parts. Even when I was at home, I remember going home from my first retreat, and we had been eating mindful meals 3 times a day, and each meal was at least half an hour, and just enjoying every bite of my food, etc. And I went home from that retreat, and I was in the car with my brother one day, and he drove up to this fast food window. I don't see so much of it in Europe, but in America there's a lot of fast food restaurants. You can drive up your car and you order something, they just give it to you through this window. So he ordered a hamburger and a big giant milkshake, and so he's driving and he's eating this hamburger, and it was less than 5 minutes. And also the milkshake, eating, drinking. And because I had just gone home from a retreat, mindful meals every day, taking my time to eat, etc. Something about that scene, it just moved me quite a bit, and I just my tears just started flowing, because I realized, he never allowed himself time to eat, or to actually have that food be a source of nourishment for his body. He didn't even take the time to register that, this food is nourishing my body. He just ate in order to go do something else. So food was just a means to have some energy to do something else. And it wasn't just my brother, it was many people in my society that ate like that. And something about that, it made me quite sad. And I realized that, I ate like that before. The sadness came because that was how I've been eating all my life, And up until I went to that retreat, then I realized, there's a different way of eating, a different way of nourishing my body with each meal. Now when I eat after the meal, I take a moment or two to really, you can feel the energy flowing in your body. You can feel your body's energy being renewed after each meal. And you can just take a moment to register that fact. And also the food that we are consuming becomes what we do, actually. So it's quite wonderful to know that the tea I drank this morning is now vapor, is a part of this Dharmatalk as well. So the food that we eat, it just doesn't remain that solid entity, but it becomes energy, and it becomes your own actions as well. So just taking a moment to feel that, to register that, help my digestion, and also, nourished me, not just through the material, the eating of the food, but spiritually as well. So eating could nourish you both physically and mentally, spiritually. Depends on how you eat and what you eat. So eating is a source of, is a kind of food that can feed your suffering or also your happiness. The second type of food is sense impressions. So we have, our senses, eyes, ears, nose, mouth, tongue. Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind. And our senses are always taking in information, tactile information or ideas, thoughts as well. And so one of the practices that we can do, we have to be aware of what we are taking in through our senses. What we take in through our senses could be toxic as well and can bring about suffering. For instance, when reading a magazine, that could give you all these pictures of what a perfect body image is, or what good fashion is like. This is... when I saw this robe, I was quite impressed. So somehow for me, this was like an iconic fashion statement when I first saw it. Well, that's why I still wear it today, because it remains like a fashion statement. You think it's brave for you to wear like very colorful clothes and walk about in society, but actually wearing this robe takes a lot of courage. People stare at you all the time and like ask for explanations and things like that. So this is not just our uniform, but it's our fashion statement, and it makes quite a statement. So things you take through your senses can also be a source of suffering. So you might want to identify the things that you're consuming right now through your senses, whether it's books, magazines, music. Music is quite big. Conversations, shows, TV shows, binge watching, etc. These can be sources of whatever suffering that you are carrying as well. For instance, I find sometimes when people are like at one end, political end, like left or right, I don't know which side you're on, maybe in the middle. But I find when you identify with a certain political party, for instance, and then you consume all the articles that speak about your party, or speak ill about the other party, or the magazines that you read, or etc., the newspaper articles that you read, or the news channels that you watch, strengthens your political view. It feeds this political view. And sometimes you're caught in this view, and you're just in this because all of the nutriments that you receive is just one-sided. It just leads you to have that kind of view. So sometimes our views lead us to suffer quite a bit too. And we have to identify what is feeding my view. What is feeding my view? And if you look deeply, you'll see, I get it from here, 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 and here. Sometimes even from my parents, my childhood, etc. So take some time to look into your ideas and your views and see, where has this come from, really? And because I find much of the time, much of my suffering comes from my views or my ideas. So I need to take time to look and see, how are my views being fed? Especially, and sometimes those views, you haven't had a chance to allow yourself to really experience them or taste them. Sometimes I walk through the dining hall during working meditation times, and then I see people are chopping vegetables and speaking about what's happening in society and things like that, and they're like reciting the news that they hear, and it's as if it's first-person experience, but you have the habit of just reciting news. You see, does that news have to do with your suffering or your happiness right now? Right now, does it have anything to do with your suffering or your happiness? Or do we want to just repeat a piece of news that we've heard to add value to ourselves? Maybe just to say that we know this. We know that this is what's going on. And yeah, so we have to kind of, Anyhow, that's a scene that I observe very often here, and I think, so I pass by and I think, does that have anything to do with chopping carrots at this moment? And then I pass. And sometimes I stop and I say, what are you doing now? Which is something that our teacher often did when he was here. He would just pass by and he would say, what are you doing? And the answer that he's looking for is, I'm following my breathing. Basically, I'm present for what I'm doing right now. I'm not lost in something else. And but if you tell him, if you're chopping carrots and you say, I'm chopping carrots, it's not good enough of an answer. Should be, I'm chopping carrots and I'm following my breathing. It means you're fully present in the here and now. Because he often says, it's obvious. I know, I can see that you're chopping carrots. So, I wouldn't be asking that question just to know that you're chopping carrots. Anyhow, be careful when a brother and sister ask you, what are you doing? Take a breath before you answer. So sense impressions, what you let in through your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, etc., can be toxic or nourishing. Is a form of food. And the third category we have is volition. Volition is, you can understand it as our deepest desire. Or you can say our will. You may have a desire to, so what kind of desires do you have in your daily life, or long term? Short term or long term, what kind of desires do you have? And these can be sources of your suffering or your happiness. If you have a desire to accumulate more fame, wealth, power, sensual pleasures, recognition, these are hooks that can lead you to suffering as well. Or if you have a desire, let's say, to help others, to protect the environment, to understand ourselves more, to understand others more. All of these desires, it can define your happiness or your suffering in your daily life. So you have to look deeply in and to see, what is my deepest desire? What am I living off of now? My actions in my daily life, what desire is feeding it? What desire is feeding my actions? What desire is feeding my relationships, etc.? What desire is feeding my career? What desire is feeding my being here in Plum Village? So volition is a source of a kind of food also for our happiness or our suffering. And the fourth category we have is consciousness. Consciousness can be both individual and collective. And we think of consciousness in terms of food because it's something that we also can consume. For instance, you are going through something, something is weighing on your mind, and you might cycle the same story in your mind over and over again, and you can repeat the same kind of story or perception in your mind. You're feeding yourself that kind of consciousness. So again, we have to, using mindfulness, we have to be able to recognize what is in our consciousness right now. Is this fear? Is this anxiety? Is this jealousy? Is this boredom? Is this a wrong perception? We have to be able to name it and see, is this nourishing me? Is this conducive to my well-being? So many of us, we allow sometimes we engage in thinking that's not so very helpful for us, and we just allow it to run on its own all day long without having any sources or any way, any means to put an end to that kind of thinking. So that's when mindfulness comes in. And for myself, it took me a while, but now, whenever I want a moment to rest my thinking, it's possible. I simply come back to my breathing. Just feeling the sensation of the in-breath and out-breath, I have a moment's reprieve from my thinking, whether it's positive or negative. If I want to feel rested and not be so active in my mind, to just come back and to feel my breathing. And I know this may be difficult for some of you because maybe you haven't had that kind of training yet, or sometimes the suffering is so big in you that we're not able to come back to our body. We're not able to kind of ground ourselves in the sensations that are happening in our body. Because for some of us, we also want to run away from our own bodies. We don't want to come back to our body. Maybe because of a traumatic experience, etc. But it's also a training. You can train yourself little by little. If in the beginning you cannot really come back, you can start by one breath. Just one breath. And if you can be with your body in one breath, you can try with the second breath. And then if you can be with your body with 2 breaths, then it's possible to be with your body with 3 breaths. Coming back to the body, coming back to the present moment, and recognizing what is going on in the body. So for me, when I want to stop thinking, like yesterday when I found out, I'm going to give the Dharmatalk today, I just went out to weed this part over here. It's gravel. And when I was weeding, I was just focusing on that sensation, those movements. I didn't want to think about the Dharmatalk today. I didn't want to, whatever. I experienced, a good time of non-thinking while I was just weeding and just being with the experience of weeding and being with my breathing. So it's possible to create for yourself if you are so caught up in your thinking and your thinking produces a lot of anxiety and stress for you. It's possible to create moments of reprieve for yourself. And this is not to run away from your anxiety or your suffering or the kind of suffering that's caused by your thinking. But sometimes we engage in a kind of circular thinking and it repeats itself and we have no way out. So creating a reprieve for yourself is you're just making an appointment with yourself. Okay, right now you make the acknowledgement that right now I cannot handle this. At this moment, I don't have the capacity to handle it at this moment. I'm not running away, because when you run away and you try to repress or shoo or cut it off, it comes back much stronger. So you make an appointment with yourself. Right now I'm not running away from this. I ask for a reprieve, like a white flag. This is peace. You wave your white flag and you ask for a moment's peace. And then when you feel much calmer in your body and mind, you can revisit the problem again and you'll find maybe you'll have a little bit more clarity. So the difference between practicing or not practicing, the difference is, one, if some people who want to get rid of their thinking, no thinking at all, it's a form of running away. But others, if you have the desire to understand yourself, understand your situation more, and at that time you don't have the capacity to do so, you just make an appointment. And you're not running away, so don't be afraid. So consciousness, you can consume individual consciousness as well as collective consciousness. And in the collective consciousness, it's quite dangerous and it's quite easy to get pulled by collective consciousness. Actually, in every moment, we are being pulled by collective consciousness. For instance, coming here in Plum Village, you experience a different kind of collective consciousness. Here, we intentionally try to create a safe environment for everyone, an environment in which you can touch peace, you can touch freedom, you can touch joy and happiness. So in the collective, there's that desire. So for instance, when an issue comes up, it's easy for people to want to resolve it right away, because we have the practices to help us to do so too. And you're in an environment that is conducive to that, that is encouraging you to do that. But let's say you are in a different environment at home. Maybe in your family life, you're used to arguing with one another. Or, in my family, before, it was like that. Every day there were arguments that broke out. And this was a part of the collective, and it became normal for everyone that we speak in such and such a way. Like, there was no consideration for kind words or things like that. And at one point it became normal, and that normalcy is a part of that collective consciousness, you see. Right now, I'm actually, when I think of the young people, and we have a wake-up retreat in August for those 18 to 35, I'm actually quite hopeful, because I see in our society nowadays more and more young people are maybe seeking for a spiritual dimension in their lives. And this has brought me quite a lot of So for me, I recognize while there is a lot of issues in our society or out there in the world, there's still war, there's still leadership that you may not approve of so much, for instance. But there's also hope. There's also this part of society that is more and more awakened to the suffering of the planet or the suffering of certain factors in our society. There's more awareness of issues, social, economic, or other issues. And this is a part of collective consciousness. And it's something that we also consume. The more and more young people are aware and are speaking out about certain issues, it feeds into the collective consciousness, and it feeds into the awakening of the collective consciousness. So each one of us as individuals, we can feed into the collective consciousness awakening, and we can also consume the awakening that is happening in the collective consciousness. And this is actually quite a powerful source of food when we speak of suffering and we want to identify the roots of our suffering, the causes of our suffering. This is actually quite a big one nowadays. And so, actually not just nowadays, throughout time, you can see war being fought because of collective consciousness. Maybe sometimes the fear that's there in the collective consciousness. When I go home to America now, just walking through the airport, you can get in touch with the level of fear. And so how can I as an individual not contribute to this level of fear? Not contribute to the collective fear that's there? That's my koan. How can I alleviate the fear that's there in the collective? So when we look at our suffering, we can identify its sources, its causes, and then we can we can make choices. How can we cut off this source of food? Because so if everything needs food to survive, when you don't feed it, it also goes away. It's the same with despair or depression, or even hope or happiness. If there's no food for hope, hope also goes away. So we have to be, when we say, oh, there's no hope in the world, are we feeding hope enough? There's no joy in my life. Am I feeding myself joy? Yeah. So we also take responsibility, and we're not just victims of what happens to us. We can also take responsibility. So I hope you have. I wish you courage to look into your suffering. I wish you courage to be still with your suffering and to take some time to look deeply into what is the things that are not going so right for us right now. At the same time, I also wish you much opportunities to recognize what is going right now. Because suffering is not enough. There's always happiness as well. You cannot just look at life and see suffering. It's not enough. That's only one part of your life. The other part is our happiness. So also take time to look into your happiness and see its sources of food, nutriment, And are we nourishing our happiness enough? Our peace, our freedom, our joy? In half an hour, we'll have a chance to do walking meditation. And in this hour, we can come back to ourselves, come back to our breathing, come back to our walk, our footsteps, and really learn to be with ourselves. It's just walking. Nothing difficult about that. Your mind may wander from time to time. You just look around you again and see, oh, others are walking, I'm walking now too. So we bring our mind back to our steps and our walking. This is a form of training to be able to come back to ourselves. Not just a form of training, but a moment to enjoy too. So many, the wonders of nature, the wonders of life that are available to us in the present moment. The sun is shining, the trees are so green, our friends are here. So please enjoy walking meditation today and enjoy just being with yourself, however you are. Thank you. Oh, one last thing. If you wanted to understand more about the relative or the ultimate, I would recommend this book, The Other Shore. It's Tay's commentary on the Heart Sutra, and I think in the Buddhist world, this is quite a gem. I've heard many people share about emptiness, etc., but none clearer and more easy to understand than our teacher. So if you haven't read it, this is a gem in the Buddhist literature, The Other Shore.